This is Face the Nation, broadcasting live from the CNN IBN headquarters in New Delhi with Sagarika Ghosh.
Hi there, there's been a massive hike in the price of petrol today. Petrol prices have been hiked by a whopping 6.28 rupees exclusive of taxes to respond to the rupee tumbling to an all-time low of 56 to the dollar. Now, the new buzzword that the finance minister has come up with to deal with the economic situation at the moment is austerity and the need to bite the bullet. Let's listen to Pranab Mukherjee and ask if austerity is indeed the medicine that India needs at this point.
I am going to issue some austerity measures. What type of austerity measures we are going to have, we are going to take it. But some sort of austerity measures to convey the signal that we are responding to the situation is needed. I don't want to press the panic button.
But as the government hands out austerity measures, is it itself ready to practice austerity and practice what it preaches? Joining us, Rajiv Kumar, Secretary General of the FICCI, joining us. Suhel, Managing Partner, Consulate, joining us. Paranjoy Guho Thakurta, Senior Journalist in our studio right here. And Subhash C. Agarwal, RTI activist, someone who really deserves an award for the kind of RTI applications he's been filing, the kind of information he's been taking out on the extravagant ways of our leaders. But that big whopping petrol price hike today, let's turn it over first to Rajiv Kumar, Secretary General of the Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Rajiv Kumar, your response to this petrol price hike, much needed, a genuine measure of austerity. What is your response?
A very hard but a very necessary decision, and I must say that the government has done well to bite the bullet. I know that this will be a burden on the middle class, and there seems to be some inequity because the diesel prices have not been raised. I think they should be raised as well. But for the first, I think this was a long-awaited measure, and this is perhaps the beginning of the real austerity that we all have to undertake. To tighten our belt, because the country requires us to stop splurging and reduce our consumption to a certain extent, so that the inflation can come down and the fiscal deficit can be improved.
But do you think this will actually result in austerity? Will people actually cut back on consuming petrol? Will people tighten their belts? Are Indians in a mood to observe austerity, or will the rich continue to consume petrol as freely as they have been?
I don't think so, Sagarika, because I think prices do matter. And everywhere, I mean, of course, the ultra rich with their conspicuous consumption will continue to do whatever they have continued to do, and which I don't condone for a minute. But the fact is that the middle class, the large masses of the middle class, the prices will begin to take effect, and therefore, and there is one other aspect of it, which is that the renewable sources of energy, the alternatives, will also get a boost because of the rise in these hydrocarbons. But let me repeat that unless we match this with a rise in price of the diesel, which is at least 13 to 14 rupees, is still under the price at which it should be sold.
Right.
The measure will not be complete, and the subsidies will not go down.
So unless we raise the price of diesel, there will be migration to diesel, and there will be adulteration, and the market will remain distorted. But let me persist with this question, just to get the FICCI view on this, because this is the big news at the moment. Do you think this hike could have been more gradual? Did it have to come in the nature of this shock of suddenly 7.5 rupees? Could it not have been calibrated through the last months?
Well, Sagarika, there is hardly any point in extending the sort of misery, as it were, because it is a hard decision. So why give it in homeopathic doses? For the first time, the government is trying to move ahead of the curve by getting the price to reflect the depreciation in the rupee and the prevailing world price for the crude crude oil. And if they really do allow it to float as they've said they will, then maybe 2 months down the road when the rupee appreciates again and the global prices perhaps are, you know, on somewhat softer, they might even be able to announce a reduction in prices. So I think a good step to try and move ahead of the curve rather than keep chasing it all the time and therefore inflicting, you know, sort of pain in small measures. But that I think lasts for much longer than this one blow, where the effect would be, you know, borne out in the next few months, because this is a once and all for a change, and it will be absorbed in the system. I think this is therefore the right decision to make.
Let me get Poranjoy in here. The right decision to make, Mr. Rajiv Kumar saying, is a long overdue decision. It really is needed. It's a genuine measure of austerity, not the token austerity mantras of, you know, restricting 5-star hotels and restricting foreign travel. This is a genuine measure of austerity. What is your understanding? Do you agree with that?
I think there's a huge amount of hypocrisy in the manner in which this whole thing is done. Petrol prices are supposed to be decontrolled. I mean, the government is not supposed to have nothing to do with petrol prices, at least on paper. It's supposed to be the Indian Oil Corporation and Hindustan Petroleum and Bharat Petroleum. Should they have wanted, they could have gradually increased it by 1 rupee every day, every month over the last 7 months, instead of suddenly increasing it by 7.5 rupees. Be that as it may, Mr. Rajiv Kumar is arguing that at some point of time, yes, this will bring down the fiscal deficit, good, that will be good for inflation. But what happens in the short run? What happens in the short run when after petrol prices go up, which is okay, it's the relatively better off sections of the population that consume petrol. What happens when day after tomorrow or the next week diesel prices go up? That's a universal intermediate. It's going to increase inflation once again. We've had food inflation at double digits for the better part of the last 4.5-5 years. It's going to, okay, it might be a one-off thing, but that's not going to ease the burden on ordinary people who are already incredibly burdened, especially the poor, because of food inflation. Now, what is happening is that the government is continuing to increase these prices. What about its own taxes? These are all ad valorem taxes. The government earns excise duties, it earns customs duties. Has the government sacrificed any of its revenue? Has the government in any way also cut down?
Is the government profiteering on petrol basically and using the finances of petrol to fund its various schemes? There's a nice Twitter, I've got here, tweet saying, can you please ask them how much of this is tax and which of course is going to finance their foreign tours. Let's bring in Suhel Seth on the issue of the government and the double standards of the government, and does it practice what it preaches? Suhel, you know, we have Mr. Subhash Agarwal in the studio today. He's the RTI activist who has taken out RTI applications on the travels of our leaders. We've seen the massive ads taken out on Rajiv Gandhi's 21st death anniversary. We've seen Jayalalitha's advertisements. You've seen Pratibha Patil's foreign tours costing over 200 crore. Meera Kumar's foreign tours costing over 10 crore. Mayawati's elephants costing over 5,000 crore. Now, with this kind of extravagant spending that the government itself is doing on taxpayers' money, penalizing the poor petrol consumer, where does that fit in this whole austerity measure package that the government is talking about?
You know, I hate to say this, this is a government in so much of disarray that I've even stopped feeling sorry for them. It's almost as if they are not just the Keystone cops, but they are bumbling from one felony to another. Here's the reality. Pranab Mukherjee comes into parliament and his definition of austerity is no 5-star hotels. I mean, you've either got to be completely out of sync with ground realities to even utter that sentence. The second thing is foreign travel. As we speak, not one junket will be reduced, not one expenditure will be spared when it comes to people in power. So what will you do? You will tax the guy who has no say and who is completely helpless, which is what you're doing. I agree with Rajiv partially. This is an immediate and required step in order to bring down the deficit. But the reality is food prices and prices per se will go up. And who's going to suffer? The common man. The so-called Aam Aadmi that this government keeps defending whenever it suits its purpose. And you know the timing. The timing is perfect. They wanted Mulayam Singh to be the non-Judas at yesterday's Last Supper so that they could dispense with Mamata Banerjee's threats. And this is exactly what's happened. So you think they would have done this 3 days ago until they didn't have Mulayam Singh's stolid support? The tragedy is not just the hypocrisy, the double-speak of the government. You know what they should have done? They should have shown by example and led by example to say that we will cancel all tours, including that of the head of state, who I don't know why she has to travel so much. She's done 98 trips in 4 years. That's as many trips that Queen Elizabeth has made in 60 years of her tenure. If that isn't a telling sign of our extravagance, what is? My second point, Shagurika, is that this is a mockery of managing deficit. You know what? How you will manage deficit, and let Paranjoy, tell me if I'm right or wrong on this one, because he's an economist by night and by day, I hope. The reality is, a lot of our natural resources are not being allowed to be harnessed. We don't have a policy in place where we allow the Keynes of the world to pump up production of crude. You know, you've charged them an extraordinary cess, and despite that, you're not allowing them to up the production. Today, if they are producing at $5 a barrel, you're having ONGC which is producing at $55 a barrel, and the government buying at $125 a barrel. I mean, when we have natural resources, why don't we use them without obviously sacrificing issues related to land ownership and tribal rights and so on? So all I'm saying is that this is a classic case of operation successful, patient dead.
Patient dead.
You're
but
not going
let
to
me put your
solve a
point.
long-term problem.
But let me put your point about the fiscal deficit to Paranjoy, and then we'll get in Mr. Subhash Agarwal. You know, the point about the fiscal deficit, the fact is a number of economists have been talking about India's extravagant welfareism. Ruchi Sharma has written about premature welfareism. We simply don't have the money to go in for Narega. We don't have the money to go in for RTE. We don't have the money to go in for food security. A bill, almost 50,000 crores spent on Narega, 2 lakh crore annually on food security bill. So when you have this huge social sector spend, are you then inevitably forced to use petroleum as your milk cow to raise money?
You know, we are mixing a whole lot of issues in this discussion, Shagurika. You know, I mean, I have never been taken in by what I describe as fiscal fundamentalism. Who says that your fiscal deficit should be 3% or 4% or 5%? It's not an issue of the deficit. It's the issue of how you spend the money, how the government borrows the money and how it spends it and what it spends it on. Here we have a situation where, okay, the President of India's office issues a rejoinder saying these are all official trips. The Speaker of the Lok Sabha said these are not joy rides or these are not, you know, holidays she's gone on representing the government. But we also have instances where the President has taken along a huge entourage, including her grandchildren, to all these so-called official visits. We have Ms. Jayalalitha at the end of 1 year splurging on newspaper advertisement. We have Ms. Mamata Banerjee who says her state has no money, and she too splurges on all these huge newspaper ads and all these ads. The point is, austerity for whom? Austerity not for me. Austerity is good for you, not for me. I mean, the whole country knows and the whole world knows that we are, I mean, who are you trying to fool with this kind of hypocrisy? I don't think anybody is fooled.
Rajiv Kumar, do you want to respond to that? Austerity for whom? The common man bearing the brunt of these whopping petrol price hikes and the president spending over 200 crore on foreign trips?
I think, Sagarika, the figures that you've been citing, about 200 crores and 10 crores and 20 crores. I mean, let me start here that yes, I completely agree with doing some rationalization of public expenditure. There's a huge amount of wasteful expenditure in the government. Absolutely true, and we need to do that. And therefore use that to bring down the fiscal deficit. But to now talk about these numbers of 210 and 40 crore in a public expenditure which is 10 lakh crore, 30% of your GDP, I think is not even the 10th decimal place, and it makes us sound a little churlish. So I think let's get the proportions right. And
okay.
The proportions
these are small figures. These are ultimately small figures, and we mustn't.